It's time to draw a map of Hobbiton, but I'm gonna do it the old way with pen and ink. And it's already all over my hands. This is gonna go great. Recently, I picked up the One Ring starter set box because I'm kind of obsessed with all these box sets that have been coming out lately, but also I just love the idea of going on a nice casual adventure exploring the Shire. So this box set comes with all the rules you need, an adventure, some dice and some cards, and even a book all about the Shire and its history and lore and stuff. Really cool book. But the thing that absolutely blew me away about this set is the incredible map by Francesco Mattioli. So after poring over all this Lord of the Rings stuff, I felt inspired and I wanted to try my hand at drawing a map in this sort of style. But to make it feel really classic, I'm adding the challenge of drawing with a crow quill and ink, a nib and ink, probably the way that Tolkien made his maps back in the day. So I got some Bristol board. This is thick pressed paper and it's meant for drawing. Regular copy paper isn't going to work for this because I'm using a Hunt 104 nib. It's metal and actually digs into the paper, so you need something sturdy. I should also say that I like 102 nibs just as much as 104s, and also G nibs. For what it's worth, they're all kind of the same and meant for this sort of drawing. Now you can't use nibs without ink, so I've got some classic Winsor and Newton Black Indian ink. This stuff is my favorite. It's the one with the spider and the top hat on the bottle. So using a regular old pencil, I went ahead and sketched out a map of Hobbiton. I used a combination of Francesco's map in the starter set and also looked up a map of the actual Hobbiton, the in New Zealand one from the movies, and kind of made up my own sort of simplified version. Okay, before I jump into the actual drawing with the 104 nib, I'm gonna start with some lettering first. For this, I'm gonna be using a calligraphy nib. It's a Speedball C-4, and I'm starting with a little bit of practice first because I'm not a confident calligrapher. Is that the right word? Calligrapher? Letterer? I'm not a confident letterer. Anyway, these nibs are cool because you just keep the pen at the same angle and you get these nice thin and thick lines. So if the pen makes a horizontal stroke, it's thin, and if you make a vertical stroke, it's thick. And I guess because these are modern versions of the type of pens that people used to use, you get this classic black letter feel, and it looks super cool, and it's perfect for this kind of old school fantasy Hobbiton map. Okay, now I'm moving on to the actual drawing, back to the 104 nib. And the cool thing about using nibs like these is that you can get a super fine line, but also a nice thick line too. And it all just depends on how much pressure you put on the pen. So if you just let the nib barely touch the paper, you'll get that really thin line, or you can press down harder and the nib spreads out and puts a thicker line of ink down on the page. It makes these pens super versatile, and with some practice you can get tons and tons of control with them. Now I'm starting with the border of the map, and I figure that drawing straight lines is the easiest way for me to get a little bit of practice, because it's been a while since I've used one of these things. And you'll notice that I'm always pulling the pen down towards myself. Because the nib is a sharp piece of curved metal, you can't really move it around like a normal ballpoint or felt tip pen. If you try to push it forward or up, it's just going to splatter the ink everywhere, and it doesn't work at all. And that's the other thing about using a crow quill or a nib pen like this. You got to be careful about the ink. So dipping a pen into a pot of ink is treacherous enough, but these pen nibs have a tendency to dump ink onto the paper if you're not careful. You got to be careful about how far you dip the pen in, and you don't want too much ink on the actual nib. So usually I give the pen a little flick on a scrap piece of paper to make sure there isn't too much ink ink pooling up in the nib. Because if there's too much and you press down, it's just going to all come pouring out of the pen and you're going to have a big blob of ink on your paper. I guess the other thing you have to be careful about is running your hand through the wet ink that you've already drawn on the page. Now this stuff really does not dry fast, so I'm being extra cautious, and because I'm right-handed, I'm working from left to right, top to bottom. And this is just sort of a general rule I keep for myself because I'm a bit clumsy and I've definitely ruined some artwork in the past by dragging my fat hand through some wet ink. And then I guess the last thing I should explain about using these nibs is that you gotta clean them. You can't just put a cap on it and call it good, but it's not super hard to clean them either. Just wipe off as much ink as you can with the paper towel, then give it a little hit with some Windex and dry it off with another clean paper towel. I'm really bad and lazy about keeping my nibs good and clean, but if you take care of them and don't press down too hard and break them like I sometimes do, they'll basically last forever. Okay, let's talk about Francesco's map. Now, I really doubt that they used a crow quill like this. It's probably all digital, but it has this sort of wavy, inky sketch look that reminds me of using nibs. But really, I just think that means that this map is so tonally appropriate for the classic Lord of the Rings Shire adventure tale that it just reminds me of using some of these old tools. Now, this Shire map is deceiving, though. It looks very simple and like a straightforward map. You know, there are hills and roads that are just made out of a few lines and squiggly little trees and simple little buildings. But as I'm working on this map, I'm realizing that Francesco has a mastery of this stuff that I haven't quite gotten the hang of yet. I think one of the hardest things about drawing maps isn't the actual drawing of the objects. You know, Hobbit homes are easy. It's just a mound with a little round door, and these sketchy trees are easy to draw, just a round squiggle with some extra squiggles on one side to give it a little bit of depth. The roads are just two parallel lines that are broken up. All this stuff is easy and anyone can do it. The tricky part about drawing these maps is figuring out how to balance all of these elements. It's about filling up the page with details, but still being intentional about where you want the viewer's eyes to be drawn to. Now, because I use this big fat calligraphy nib, the lettering is super thick and your eyes go straight there. You know, that's a really common technique for drawing the eye. You know, make the most important lines on your drawing the biggest and boldest, and it makes the drawing work most of the time. You know, so maybe it's okay that the lettering on this map is the biggest and boldest thing, but I actually think it would be cooler if the actual drawings of those locations were the real focal points. Francesco does a really good job of this by building up those details on the main focal points of the map. The towns and the forests have more going on while the fields are more sparse. There's still lines and drawings taking up every part of this map, but the most details are around the important areas. I also think color goes a really long way and can really help bring focus to a map. If you'll notice, all the towns have red roofs, and red contrasts with the green hills of the Shire, so your eye goes to those smaller, tighter, more detailed, contrasted color areas. Okay, so there's actually a really great quote in the back of the starter set adventure book that says, "He looked at maps and wondered what lay beyond their edges. Maps made in the Shire showed mostly white spaces beyond its borders." Now, obviously, this says a lot about the Shire, but I also think this is such a cool idea when it comes to making maps. It's a reminder that not every detail needs to be filled in and explained, but also that making conscious decisions about where you put the details is the key to making a good, compelling map. Okay, so anyway, that's just an observation on why I love Francesco's Shire map so much, but I feel like maybe my Hobbiton map isn't as successful. It's kind of what I've learned in the process of making this map, but don't get me wrong, I'm still having a lot of fun drawing and making this map. I wanted to draw a Hobbiton map forever. whatever. And experimenting with new tools is just a great way to stretch your artistic muscles. And while I probably won't be using a crow quill all that much, but it has been fantastic practice. And even working with different pens or even digitally, I'm going to be better at drawing just by making this map. Plus, I've gone through this whole process. I've studied Francesco's Shire map, and now I have a ton of new ideas on how to make my next map even cooler. So let me know what you think of my Hobbiton map in the comments, and if you're trying to make your own map with a dip pen with a crow quill, please share it with me on social media. I love to see what you all make. If you'd like to show this channel some support, I have a Patreon where I make monthly tabletop role-playing game zines. Sometimes they're one-shot adventures, sometimes they're a collection of magic items. This month, I'm putting together a guide on creating your own dungeon. It's going to be a fun one. Check out the link in the description to sign up for a digital or physical version of the book that I'll mail out to you every month. All right, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. See ya!